Before The Mask, before The Legend, before The Silence of the Lambs made Hannibal Lecter untouchable, there was this film. And behind it was a production that collapsed so badly mid-filming that the crew packed up and left before the ending was finished. These are the dark facts about Manhunter. 1.
Your struggle. And we're not going to use it.
Here's something most people never think about when they watch Manhunter. The version of Hannibal Lecter in this movie doesn't perform his evil. He just carries it around like something ordinary. Brian Cox built the character by studying a real Scottish murderer named Peter Manuel, a man who stayed so calm during his own murder trial that he decided to represent himself in court. While discussing horrific crimes in front of a jury, Manuel reportedly showed no distress, no guilt, and no urgency, just control. And Cox took that exact quality and handed it to Lecter. No dramatic speeches, no theatrics, no raised voice. Just a man sitting across from you who knows exactly how dangerous he is and feels no need to prove it. That psychological stillness is what made Cox's performance genuinely unsettling, because it felt less like a movie monster and more like someone you might actually encounter in a very bad situation. The whole atmosphere of the film shifted because of that choice. Once the production started chasing that kind of realism, the set itself started becoming uncomfortable in ways nobody planned for. 2.
Making a movie about something that horrible and making it human.
While Brian Cox kept things cold and controlled, Tom Noonan went somewhere completely different while preparing to play Francis Dollarhide. He removed himself from the production entirely before cameras even rolled. Noonan refused to meet most of the cast. He avoided casual conversation. Crew members were reportedly asked to address him as Francis rather than Tom. He changed the way he moved, the way he held his body, and the way he occupied a room so that anyone standing near him would feel a low-grade discomfort before he even spoke a single line. Think about what that actually means for the other actors on the set. Imagine arriving for a difficult scene with someone you have never spoken to, someone the crew already feels uneasy around, and then trying to perform naturally once the cameras start. That uncertainty doesn't stay invisible. Cameras pick it up. And in Manhunter, you can actually feel it during many of Dollarhide's scenes. Some of these nervous reactions may not have been scripted. Some of that tension may have been completely genuine. And that is a strange and uncomfortable thing to realize while watching what is supposed to be a fictional thriller. 3.
You know, these two guys are really deeply involved on a strange level.
Will Graham is not a typical movie detective. He doesn't solve cases through clever tricks or sharp instincts. He does it by thinking like the killers he hunts, which means absorbing their logic, their patterns, and their psychology deeply enough to understand how they see the world. William Peterson lived inside that headspace for months during production, and it reportedly followed him out of the movie when filming ended. He later admitted that elements of Graham's emotional behavior leaked into other performances afterward. Small things at first, but persistent. The role had settled into him in ways that didn't simply disappear once the camera stopped rolling. If you watch Peterson and Manhunter carefully, you can actually see that weight on his face. Graham never looks confident. He never looks in control. He looks like a man who has seen too much and carries it in his body constantly. That realism came from somewhere real, and it cost Peterson more than a normal acting job usually does. After production wrapped, he reportedly cut and dyed his hair partly to mentally separate himself from the character, which tells you something important about how deep the role actually went. 4. Now here's where things get genuinely strange. Manhunter cost around $15 million to produce and made roughly $8.5 million at the box office. That is not a disappointment. That is a collapse. And the failure rippled outward fast. Audiences in 1986 weren't ready for a psychological thriller that moved slowly, kept its violence emotionally distant, and focused heavily on criminal profiling rather than action. Michael Mann was making something darker and more cerebral than what mainstream crowds expected from a crime film, and the box office reflected exactly how much they rejected it. The financial damage contributed directly to the collapse of De Laurentiis Entertainment Group, the studio behind the film. And when that company fell apart, the rights to the Lecter character were sold off at a low price, long before anyone understood how valuable the character would eventually become. One of cinema's most famous villains almost ceased to exist because his first film arrived before audiences were ready for him. If you're enjoying this, hit subscribe right now because the next few facts get considerably darker. 5. Even the people who did see Manhunter in theaters largely missed who they were actually watching. The character's name was spelled Lecter with a K instead of Lecter with a C. He appeared only briefly. There was no dramatic entrance, no theatrical performance, and no signal that this quiet figure would eventually become one of the most recognized villains in film history. Cox played him with such restraint that audiences treated him like a minor character inside someone else's story. No one walked out of the theater talking about the monster in the cell. He barely registered. Years later, after The Silence of the Lambs turned Lecter into a cultural institution, people went back and rewatched Manhunter and realized what they had missed. They had been sitting in theaters watching the beginning of one of cinema's greatest villain legacies and had no idea at all. That is the kind of historical footnote that feels almost eerie when you think about it long enough. 6. The scene where Reba touches a sedated tiger is one of the most visually unusual moments in the movie, and the discomfort you feel watching it isn't entirely manufactured. Joan Allen was on set with an actual live tiger during filming. The animal had been sedated, and a veterinarian was present the entire time. But sedation is not the same as safety. A tiger that is chemically slowed down is still a massive, unpredictable animal, and the distance between calm and dangerous is never as large as people assume. Allen's reactions during that scene carry a quality that feels impossible to completely fake. There's a carefulness in how she moves, a stillness in how she holds her body that comes across as genuine rather than performed. Mann wasn't interested in making the audience feel safe. He wanted them to feel something real, and he kept finding ways to put genuine risk on screen to make that happen. He kept finding ways to make the discomfort authentic rather than simulated. And the tiger scene is probably the clearest example of that approach. 7. The version of Manhunter that audiences saw in 1986 was not the ending Michael Mann originally wanted them to experience. Early cuts of the finale reportedly leaned much harder into ambiguity and psychological damage, leaving Graham in a place that felt unresolved and emotionally brutal rather than wrapped up in any satisfying way. Test audiences pushed back hard. They found it too bleak, too open-ended, and too heavy to sit with after everything the film had already put them through. So the ending was adjusted to feel more complete by conventional Hollywood standards, giving audiences just enough resolution to leave the theater without feeling entirely hollowed out. Which raises an uncomfortable question about the version that exists today. If the released cut already feels cold and difficult and psychologically draining, what did the original version do to the people who watched it in those early screenings? Because Mann was not trying to comfort anyone with this movie. He was trying to leave a mark, and the studio pulled him back just before he could go all the way. Sometimes the breakdown of a production creates something that the original plan never could have. The world wasn't ready for Manhunter in 1986, so it got buried. But the darkness it built never went anywhere. Subscribe and tell me in the comments which forgotten film we're pulling out of the grave next.